I bought the property for practically nothing, which should have been my first warning sign. 23 acres of Appalachian woodland in eastern Kentucky, complete with a partially collapsed farmhouse that the realtor described as rustic and full of character. What she meant was, structurally, unsound and probably haunted. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a freelance writer who thought isolation would cure my creative block. Spoiler alert, isolation in the Appalachian Mountains doesn't cure anything. It just gives whatever's wrong with you more room to grow. I moved into the property in September 2019, planning to spend 6 months renovating the old house and writing the novel I'd been putting off for 5 years. The farmhouse dated back to the 1870s, built by a family whose name appeared on the deed as Hutchins. The local historical society had almost nothing about them, which I found odd for such an old homestead. Usually these mountain families kept meticulous records passed down through generations. The Hutchins family seemed to have simply stopped existing after 1878. The first 3 weeks were normal. Well, as normal as living alone in a creaking house miles from Fairhaber, the nearest neighbor can be. I spent my days pulling up rotted floorboards and my nights listening to the mountains settle around me. The woods here are different from other forests I've known. Thicker, older. The trees grow so dense that even at noon the shadows pool between them like standing we. 8er. I found the diary on a Tuesday. I was tearing out the wall between what had been a small bedroom and an even smaller storage closet when my crowbar punched through into a hollow space. Not unusual in houses, this old people built weird additions, closed off rooms for insulation, created dead spaces that serve no clear purpose. But when I pulled away enough boards to shine my flashlight inside, I saw something that made my skin prickle. A leather-bound book sat on a small wooden shelf, perfectly preserved, as if someone had placed it there yesterday. Next to it was an oil lamp, a tinder box, and a child's cloth doll with button eyes. The space had been deliberately sealed. Someone had wanted these items hidden, but preserved. I'm not proud of how quickly I ripped that wall apart. The diary's cover was soft leather, dyed dark brown with no title or name embossed on it. The pages were yellowed but intact, filled with cramped handwriting in faded ink. The first entry was dated March 3, 1878, and it began simply, "My name is Eleanor Hutchins. I am writing this so that someone will know what happened to us, so that someone will understand why we did what we had to do. I. Tea on the dusty floor and read until the sun set and I had to fetch my own lamp." Eleanor Hutchins was 26 years old when she started the diary. She lived in this house with her husband, Thomas, 32, her father-in-law, Jeremiah, 61, her 2 daughters, Catherine, 7, and Mary, 4, and Thomas's younger brother, William, 23. 6 people in this isolated farmstead, working the rocky soil and hunting the surrounding woods to survive. The early entries were mundane. Eleanor wrote about the late winter, the struggle to make their food stores last until spring. Catherine's cough that wouldn't quite go away, Mary's endless energy despite the cold. She wrote about Thomas and William checking their trap lines, about Jeremiah's complaints about his joints, about the small rituals of survival that defined Appalachian life in the 1870s. Then, on March 19th, the tone changed. Thomas came back from the North Woods today with the strangest look on his face. He wouldn't speak of what he'd seen, not even to William, and those two tell each other everything. At supper, Catherine asked her father why he seemed frightened. He told her he wasn't frightened, but I saw his hands shake when he reached for his cup. After the children were abed, I asked him what had happened. He said he'd found tracks. When I asked what kind, he said, "Wrong kind, wrong shape, too big." Then he wouldn't say more. But he's barred the door tonight, though we've never done so before, except in the worst winter storms. I felt a chill despite the mild September evening. The entries continued and a pattern emerged. Thomas and William stopped going to the North Woods. They checked only the trap lines to the south and east, and they never went alone. Jeremiah, who'd lived in Appalachian Mountains his entire life, told Eleanor that the old-timers had stories about the North Woods, about why the Cherokee wouldn't camp there, why even animals seemed scarce in that direction. There are places, Eleanor wrote, quoting her father-in-law, where the land doesn't want people. Where, mething older than people still holds claim. I paused here, looking up from the diary. The north side of my property, the direction I'd barely explored, began about 200 yards from the house. The trees there grew differently, I'd noticed. Twisted. Dense. I'd told myself I'd hike up there annually, but I kept finding reasons to put it off. Now I wondered if some part of me had known better. Eleanor's entries from late March and early April documented a growing unease. Strange sounds at night, not animal sounds, she insisted, but something that mimicked animals badly, like a person who'd heard a wolf howl and tried to reproduce it without quite understanding how. Scratches on the outside of the house, too high up to be from any normal creature. Tools that went missing from the barn and reappeared days later in wrong places, arranged in patterns. Thomas found his hunting knife. Today, Eleanor wrote on April 7th. It was stuck in the ground outside Mary's window, blade down, with 7 small stones arranged in a circle around it. He says it's just boys from down the valley playing tricks, but there are no boys close enough to reach us and return before dawn. And what boys would know to come to Mary's window specifically? We've told no one which rooms the children sleep in. The family began taking precautions. They kept the children inside after dark. They stopped using the outhouse at night, keeping chamber pots in the bedrooms instead. Thomas and William took turns, staying awake through the night, watching from the window. On April 15th, they saw it. Eleanor's handwriting became shakier here, the letters pressed hard into the page as if she'd been gripping the pen too tight. William woke us at midnight. He'd been at the window when something emerged from the tree line. He could see it by the quarter moon tall, he said, perhaps 7 feet, but it didn't walk like a man. It moved wrong, joints bending in places they shouldn't. It came within 30 yards of the house, then stopped. William said it stood there for nearly an hour, swaying slightly. Or it retreated into the woods. In the morning, Thomas and I went to look at where it had stood. The grass was dead in a perfect circle, and there was a smell like meat gone bad in summer heat. Here's what I've learned researching Appalachian folklore for my writing. Every culture has stories about things in the woods, but Appalachian stories are different. They're not metaphors or cautionary tales with neat moral lessons. They're warnings. They're practical advice dressed up in narrative. When old-timers say, "Don't whistle at night," "Don't answer a voice calling your name from the woods," "Don't follow lights you see between the trees," they mean it literally. The Hutchins family was encountering something that the modern, rational part of my brain wanted to explain away. Animals. Illness. Shared delusion brought on by isolation and fear. But I was sitting in their house reading words of Atten in desperate honesty, and I couldn't quite make myself believe they were crazy or lying. Eleanor's entries became more frantic. The thing, she never called it anything specific, just it, or the thing from the North Woods, came closer to the house each night. They saw it more clearly. Eleanor described it as wrong in every way a thing can be wrong, with proportions that didn't make sense and movements that hurt to watch. On April 23rd, it spoke. It called to Catherine, Eleanor wrote, her script nearly illegible here. It used Thomas's voice, perfect, exact, standing at the edge of the tree line in the dark where we couldn't see it clearly. It called out, "Catherine, sweetheart, come here to Papa." But Thomas was standing right beside me. I had my hand on his arm. We both heard it. Catherine started toward the door before I caught her. She fought me. She screamed that Papa nay. Eated her. Why wouldn't I let her go to Papa? She's 7 years old, and she couldn't understand why our father's voice would lie. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking and the house suddenly felt too big around me, too full of shadows and empty rooms. I checked every lock twice before I make myself return to the diary. The Hutchins family was falling apart. Catherine began sleepwalking, heading for the door each night until they started tying her to her bed. Mary stopped speaking entirely. Jeremiah took to reading from the Bible constantly, muttering prayers under his breath. Omas and William argued about what to do: leave the homestead and abandon everything they'd built, or stay and defend their home. They didn't understand yet that those weren't the only options, that there was a third choice, though it was worse than either alternative. On May 2nd, Eleanor wrote, "FT, on Mary outside this morning. Don't know how she got out. All the doors were still barred from inside. She was standing in the yard in her nightdress, barefoot, with dirt under her fingernails as if she'd clawed her way up from the ground. She won't say what happened, won't speak at all. But there are marks on her arms, like someone held her too tight. The fingers were too long." That entry ended there, mid-page, as if Eleanor had been interrupted or couldn't bear to write more. The next entry was dated May 10th, and it was in a different hand, rougher, more masculine. Thomas's writing. Lenore asked me to continue the record. She says it's important that someone know, even if we don't survive this. I think she's right. Something should remain. William is dead. We buried him this morning in the plot behind the barn, next to where my mother lies. He went out 2 nights ago to check on a noise near the chicken coop. I saw it happen from the window. The thing came from the woods faster than anything that size should move. It took him. I couldn't do anything. I had my rifle, but I couldn't risk the shot in the dark. And by the time I got outside, there was only blood and drag mark. Leading north. We found him yesterday. Parts of him arranged on the path leading toward the north woods, like it wanted us to follow, like it was showing us what it could do. My brother, 23 years old, he was going to marry the Miller girl come autumn. I know what I have to do now. Eleanor doesn't want me to, but she knows it's the only way. The old stories, the ones Jeremiah told us, they all say the same thing. You can't fight it. You can't run from it, but you can bargain with it. You can make a trade. The temperature in the house seemed to drop as I read those words. Oatsy, in my window, the Appalachian darkness was complete, and somewhere to the north, the woods waited. I forced myself to keep reading. Thomas's entries detailed the family's disintegration. Jeremiah had a stroke or heart attack. The description wasn't clear, and died calling out warnings about the old things and the debts we owe. Catherine's condition worsened. She no longer recognized her family during her episodes, speaking in a voice that sounded wrong, saying things a 7-year-old shouldn't know. She told me today where my brother is, Thomas wrote on May 14th. All of him, not just he parts we found. She described the place in detail, though she's never been to the North Woods. She drew me a map. At the bottom, she wrote in handwriting that isn't hers, "Come and see what's left of William. Come and learn the price of trespass." Then came the entry that made my blood run cold. This, May 20th, 1878. I met with it tonight. Face to face. I went to the North Woods alone, to the place Catherine had described. I found my brother. God help me. I found what it had done to him, how it had changed him, and he was still alive. Still aware. It had made him into something else, something that would last in torment, and it wanted me to see. The thing was there. Up close, it's worse than I can write. It doesn't have a proper face, just something that suggests a face, that makes your mind fill in the terrible details. It spoke to me in my dead mother's voice, in William's voice, in my own voice. It told me what it wanted. There are old bargains in these mountains, agreements made long before my family came here, before white men came here at all. The Cherokee knew. They kept the pacts. We didn't even know there were pacts to keep. It wants one of us. It says it's owed one, that my family has lived on its land, hunted its woods, taken from its territory for 5 years without paying tribute. It showed me William as proof of what happens when the debt goes unpaid. But it offered me a choice. I can choose who it takes. I can spare the rest. Eleanor is pregnant. She has not told me yet, but I know. I see the signs. If I give it one of us, the others can live. Our family can continue. The baby can be born. I have 3 days to decide. The next several pages were torn out. Ragged edges showed where they'd been ripped from the binding, leaving a gap in the narrative. When the diary resumed, it was Eleanor's handwriting again, but changed shakier, smaller, as if she'd been writing while trying not to be noticed. Thomas won't tell me what he's decided. He looks at me, at Catherine, at Mary, and I see him weighing our lives in his mind. I know what the thing offered him. I found the pages he tore out, burned in the fireplace, but I could read enough of the charred fragments. He's going to choose. God forgive him. He's going to choose one of us to save the rest. I can't let him do that. I can't let him live with that choice. I can't let one of my babies be taken by that thing to end up like William, changed and suffering and aware. There's another way. The old stories have another answer, though it's one no one wants to take. Jeremiah mentioned it once, years ago, when he was deep in his cups and talking about the mountain lore. He said when the old things come calling, when the debts come due, sometimes the only way out is to make sure there's nobody left to collect from. If we're not here, it can't take us. If we're already gone, the bargain can't be kept. I've prepared everything. Thomas is out checking the snares. When he returns, it will be done. I'm so tired. I haven't slept properly in months. The baby inside me kicks and turns, and I think about what kind of world I'd be bringing another child into, what kind of life we'd have, always looking over our shoulders, always waiting for the thing to come back, to decide the debt. Snowed fully paid. This is mercy. This is love. This is the only choice I have left that doesn't end with one of my daughters screaming in the dark woods, while something wears their father's face. Catherine is singing in the next room. Mary is playing with her doll. They don't know. They won't know. Forgive me. The diary ended there. I sat in the destroyed bedroom as night deepened around me, holding a book written by a woman who'd been dead for 141 years, and I understood what I'd moved into. Not just a house, a tomb. The historical record confirmed what the diary suggested. The Hutchins family disappeared in late May 1878. A traveling peddler found the homestead abandoned 3 weeks later and reported it to the authorities. No bodies were ever found. No signs of struggle. Just an empty house with food still on the table, beds unmade, and no indication of where 6 people had gone. The property passed through several owners over the decades. None stayed long. Most left within a year, citing bad feelings or strange occurrences. The place had been empty for the last 15 years before I bought it. I should have left that night, packed my things, gotten in my truck, and driven until the mountains were a memory. But I'm a writer, and writers are stupid in specific ways. We convince ourselves that understanding something gives us power over it, that if we can just find the right words, we can explain the inexplicable and make it safe. Also, I'd spent most of my savings on this property. Pride and poverty are a dangerous combination. I started researching. The local library had old newspaper archives, census records, and a filing cabinet full of folklore compiled by Depression-era WPA workers. I found references to the North Woods, though never by that specific name. Different terms in different eras. The old ground, the watching place, where the Cherokee wouldn't camp. One account from 1823, written by a surveyor, noted, "The natives inform us that the northern valley is closed to settlement by agreement with the previous inhabitants. When pressed, Ed, they will not clarify whether previous inhabitants means an earlier tribe or something else entirely. They become agitated when questioned further and refuse to guide us in that direction. Another record from 1856, the Shawnee elder spoke of the North Woods as a place of keeping, where old debts are maintained and old things still hold dominion. He said his people had learned long ago that some territories must remain unviolated, that there are beings who predate human settlement and who tolerate our presence only so long as we respect the boundaries. I found 3 other instances of families disappearing from properties bordering the North Woods, one in 1823, one in 1901, and one in 1934. In each case, the families had lived there for several years before vanishing without explanation. In each case, local rumor suggested they'd gone into the woods or been taken by something unsolved. Here's the thing about Appalachian horror that sets it apart from other regional American folklore. It's rooted in a deep understanding that humans are not the apex predator. The mountains are older than human civilization. The forests were here before we learned to make fire, and they'll be here after we're gone. And in that vast stretch of time, something might have developed that sees us the way we see cattle as resources, as territory markers, as things to be managed and occasionally culled. Modern people forget that our dominance over the natural world is recent and fragile. We've only been safe from the things that eat us for maybe 200 years, and only in certain places, and only because we maintain constant vigilance. The Appalachian wilderness remembers what it was like before we carved out our tiny safe spaces. Some parts of it never forgot. I convinced myself that understanding the history made me safe. That knowledge was protection. I was wrong. The first incident happened on my 29th night in the house. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of singing, a child's voice, sweet and clear, coming from outside. It was singing All the Pretty Little Horses, a lullaby I recognized from my own childhood. I went to the window. Catherine Hutchins stood in my yard. I know it was impossible. I know she'd been dead for 141 years. But I saw her clearly in the moonlight. A small girl in an old-fashioned dress, barefoot, her hair in braids, standing exactly weep bright, ere Eleanor had described finding Mary that morning. She was looking up at my window, looking directly at me. Then she smiled and her mouth opened too wide, and something in her face shifted in a way that faces don't shift, and I stumbled backward from the window so fast I tripped over my own feet. When I looked again, she was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by reading the diary and living alone in an isolated house. The mind plays tricks. Isolation breeds delusion. There are rational explanations, but I knew what I'd go. Seen, the incidents escalated. Tools went missing from my workshop and reappeared in strange places. My hammer stuck, blade down in the ground outside, surrounded by a circle of stones. My work boots placed neatly on the front porch, though I'd left them inside, filled with dead leaves and small bone. I heard voices at night. My mother's voice, though she'd been dead 6 years, calling my name from the woods. My ex-wife's voice, asking why I'd left her. My own voice, conducting both sides of conversations I'd never had. The thing was testing me, learning me, trying to find the right approach. Doing 'em. The 34th night, I saw it clearly for the first time. I was sitting at the kitchen table reading through Eleanor's diary again, trying to understand what she'd meant by prepared everything. The lamp beside me flickered, and I looked up. It stood at the edge of the tree line, exact, lay where Thomas had described, tall, impossibly tall with proportions that made my eyes hurt, arms too long, legs that bent wrong, a head that was the right shape but the wrong size. In the moonlight, I could see how it moved, swaying like a tree in wind, but there was no wind. Then it smiled. I was too far away to see details, but I felt that smile, felt the wrongness of it. felt how it was delighted to finally be seen clearly. It raised one hand too many fingers, or not enough, I couldn't tell, and waved at me. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran from the window, grabbed my truck keys, and made it halfway to the front door before I stopped. Where would I go? This thing had been here for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. It had waited patiently for the Hutchins family to accrue their debt. It had made bargains and kept them with terrible precision. If I ran, would it follow? Would it consider my flight a broken agreement, even though I'd never knowingly made one? And more importantly, was I already in debt? I'd been living on this land for over a month, hunting the woods, squirrels mostly, nothing significant, but still, taking from the territory. Was the clock already ticking on whatever bargain I'd inherited by buying this property? I stood in my own hallway, breathing hard, and realized I was in exactly the same position as Thomas Hutchins. I could run and maybe escape, but maybe not. I could stay and face whatever came, but I'd seen what it had done to William, or I could try to bargain. Eleanor had found a fourth option, but I wasn't ready to consider that yet. I spent the next week researching bargains. Every folklore tradition has them agreements with things beyond human understanding, pacts sealed with specific conditions. The rules vary, but certain end principles remain consistent. Debts must be paid, words have power, and every bargain requires something of value in exchange. The Cherokee oral traditions, the ones I could find documented by anthropologists, spoke of the old ones who inhabited the mountains before human settlement. These were not gods or spirits in the way we typically understand those terms. They were something else, entities that existed in the spaces between, that claimed territory and defended it, that could be negotiated with if you understood the proper protocols. The key word was if. I found a reference in a 1920s folklore collection to debt markers, specific signs that indicated you'd incurred an obligation to the old ones, missing tools that reappeared in circles of stones, dead grass in perfect geometric shapes, animals found killed and arranged in patterns, voices calling your name at night. I had a lill of them. According to the account, once you'd been marked, you had a limited time to acknowledge the debt and propose a settlement. If you ignored it, the collector would take payment by force. The collection didn't specify what that payment might be, but I'd read about William Hutchins and I'd imagine. On the 41st night, I made my decision. I walked into the North Woods. I know how stupid that sounds. Every horror story protagonist does this, and everyone watching or reading thinks, "Don't do that, you idiot." But here's the reality when you're in the situation, when the Alte native is waiting in your house for something to take you on its own terms. Walking into the danger feels like the only way to take back control. I brought offerings based on what I'd researched: tobacco, traditional, honey, sweet things for sweet words, and a small knife, something of value the could cut that had utility. I carried a flashlight but didn't turn it on. The moon was nearly full, and I wanted to show I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was stupid. I was terrified of the dark. The North Woods were different as soon as I crossed the tree line. The air felt thicker, older, cast breathing in a closed room that hadn't been opened in years. The trees grew at wrong angles, twisted into shapes that seemed deliberate rather than natural. The path, because there was a path, worn smooth by something's passage, led deeper into territory that felt increasingly wrong. I found the PS free lace after about 20 minutes of walking. A clearing that shouldn't exist, perfectly circular, with grass that was dead not just from winter but from something that pulled the life out of it. At the center stood a flat stone that might have been a natural formation or might have been placed there deliberately. It was too regular, too smooth. On the stone were bones, small ones arranged in patterns, and among the bones, rust-flaked metal that might have been tools, and rotted scraps of fabric that might have been tools, and rotted scraps of fabric that might have been clothing. This was where it collected its debts. I placed my offerings on the e-stone, spacing them carefully. Then I spoke, my voice embarrassingly shaky. I'm here to acknowledge the debt and propose a settlement. The woods went silent. Not the natural silence of creatures pausing their noise, the absolute silence of held breath, of waiting. Then it came. It didn't emmer. Gee, from the trees, so much as it was suddenly there, as if it had always been there, and I'd only just noticed. Up close, it was worse than glimpses had suggested. My mind kept trying to give it a shape, a form I could understand, but the details slid away from comprehension. Tall, yes. Roughly humano. Id, yes, but wrong in every detail, as if something had learned to approximate human shape from a description, but had never actually seen a person. It spoke, and its voice was every voice I'd ever known and no voice at all. You live on the land, you take from the land, the debt accrues. This has always been the way. I didn't know, I said. I didn't know there was a debt. Ignorance has never excused obligation. The previous family learned this. The families before them learned this. You will learn this. My hands were shaking. I forced them still. Thomas Hutchins was offered a chook. He could select one person to pay the debt. He was offered a choice. He did not choose. His wife chose for him. The debt was paid, though not in the manner prescribed. What did she do? I knew, had suspected, but I needed to hear it. The thing that wasn't quite a smile crossed the face. The T wasn't quite a face. She removed the debtors from collection. Very clever. Very final. The debt was satisfied because there was no family left to owe it. Eleanor had killed them all. Her husband, her daughters, herself. The baby that would have been born that fall. She'd probably used Poison Quest. Painless, if she'd measured it right. She'd spared them from being taken, from being changed like William had been changed, by making sure there was nothing left to take. I'm alone, I said. I have no family here, just me. You are sufficient debt for the time accrued. You have been here, foe, our 10 days. You have hunted the land, cut its trees, drunk its water. A single debt payment is appropriate. I'm offering a different settlement. I fought to keep my voice steady. I'll leave. I'll abandon the property, never return. The land will go wild again. No more human presence. No more debt accrual. The thing considered this. When it moved, it was like watching time-lapse photography of plants growing too smooth, too fluid, wrong. The land is yours by human law. You will sell it to another. Another will come, will accrue debt, will owe payment. The cycle continues. This is not settlement. This is postponement. It was right. I'd already thought of this problem. Even if I walked away, the property would eventually be sold again. Someone else would move in, would incur the same debt, would face the same horror. I could save myself, but I'd only be passing the curse to the next owner. Unless... What if I make sure no one ever lives here again, I said. What if I burn the house, salt the ground, make the property worthless, put it in a conservation trust that forbids development? The thing tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. You would destroy your investment. You would lose everything you have purchased. Yes. And why would you do this? Because Eleanor Hutchins had killed her entire family to save them from this thing. And I couldn't let that sacrifice be meaningless, because I'd read her diary and I felt like I knew her. And I couldn't bear the thought of another family stumbling into the same nightmare. Because sometimes the only way to win is to make sure nobody else loses. I didn't say any of that. I just said, because it ends the cycle. No more debt, no more debtors. The land returns to you permanently. E's silence stretched for so long I thought maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe it would just take me anyway. Then, the bargain is acceptable. You will leave this place. You will ensure no human inhabits this territory again. In exchange, your debt is forgiven, and you will not be collected upon. Howdy. Oh, I know you'll keep the bargain. That terrible smile again. We keep all bargains. It is humans who break them, who forget them, who pretend they never agreed. We always keep our word. Something about the way it said always made me believe it. This thing was older than human civilization, and it operated on rules that were absolute. If it said it would keep the bargain, it would. I accept, I said. Then place your hand upon the stone and speak your name. The bargain will be sealed. I should have been more careful. I should have asked more questions. But I was exhausted and terrified. And I wanted this nightmare over. I placed my hand on the stone. It was cold, far colder than the night air, and said, Marcus Webb. The cold rushed up my arm, into my chest, into my head. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't be anything except a point of freezing awareness. Then it released me, and I stumbled backward. The thing was gone. The clearing was empty except for the stone and the offerings I'd brought, which had disappeared. I ran back to the house and didn't stop until I was inside with every door locked. The next morning, I started making calls. I contacted a lawyer about setting up a conservation trust. I called the demolition company about removing the house. I called the county about restrictions on land use. I worked like a person possessed because I was terrified that if I slowed down, if I gave myself time to think, I'd lose my nerve. It took 3 months to arrange everything. 3 months of living in that house, knowing what was in the woods, feeling watched every moment. But the thing honored the bargain, didn't approach the house again, didn't call my name, didn't appear at the tree line. It was waiting for me to keep my end of the purchase deal. The house burned on a cold December morning. I lit the fire myself after removing anything of value, which wasn't much except Eleanor's diary, which I'd already decided to donate to the Historical Society. I watched from a safe distance as 150 years of history went up in smoke and flame. The year star. Land was placed in a permanent conservation trust with specific language forbidding any structure, any development, any human habitation. The trust was funded by what little remained of my savings. I'd lost everything I'd invested in the property, plus the cost of the legal work. I was effective. You broke, but I was alive, and I'd ended the cycle. I left Kentucky in January 2020 and never went back. I moved to a small town in Ohio, got a job teaching high school English, and tried to forget about the Appalachian woods and the things that live in them. I couldn't forget, though. I started writing this account, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to understand what Eleanor Hutchins had faced, what choice she'd made. Here's what I've come to believe. Eleanor wasn't crazy, and she wasn't evil. She was a mother who saw her children threatened by something beyond human comprehension, and she made the only choice she could live with, which was to make sure she didn't have to live with it at all. She chose a quick death for her family over a slow horror at the hands of something that would have changed them, broken them, kept them suffering. Was it the right choice? I don't know. I can't judge her. Thomas was going to choose which family member to sacrifice. Can you imagine living with that decision? Knowing you'd selected your own child to be taken by something that would do to her what it did to William? Eleanor chose a third option. She removed all the pieces from he board. I think about that sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. I think about how the thing said Eleanor was very clever. It almost sounded like respect. She'd found a loophole in an ancient contract, a way to satisfy the debt while denying the collector its prize. But mostly, I think about the other families. The ones from 1823, 1901, 1934. The ones who disappeared into the North Woods and were never seen again. How many people died because they didn't know about the debt until it was too late? How many are still there in some form, changed and suffering like William Hutchins? And I think about the future. The land is protected now, supposedly permanent. But permanent is a human concept, and humans are very good at finding loopholes in their own rules. Governments change, laws change. 100 years from now, will someone decide that land is too valuable to leave tie? Will they overturn the trust, build houses, bring in families? If they do, the thing will be waiting. It's patient. It's been there for thousands of years. It can wait a few hundred more. I donated Eleanor's diary to the local historical society with a note explaining where I'd found it. They were thrilled it solved a historical mystery, explained what happened to the Hutchins family. They wanted to interview me, write an article about the discovery. I declined. I gave them the diary and told them to do what they wanted with it. I just asked that they include Eleanor's warning, her FINA L entry, in any publication. People should know what she faced, what she chose, why. Some reviewers have criticized Eleanor's choice. They say she should have run, should have fought, should have found another way. They say killing her children was unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. Those people have never faced something beyond human understanding. They've never stood in front of something that breaks the rules of reality and been told to choose which loved one dies. They've never had to calculate whether a quick, merciful death is better than whatever alternative is being offered. I hope they never have to. Here's what I learned from my time in the Appalachian woods. There are places where human rules don't apply. Places where older agreements hold sway, where we're not the dominant species, where something else has prior claim. Most of the time, we don't encounter these PLACEs. We've built our cities and suburbs and carefully managed wilderness areas, and we've convinced ourselves that we've conquered nature. But we haven't. We've just made deals, most of them unconscious, some of them very old that let us pretend we're in charge. And sometimes those deals come due. The Hutchins family stumbled into territory that was claimed by something older than human settlement. They incurred a debt without knowing it. When the collector came calling, they had no good options, only bad ones and worse ones. Thomas was going to choose. He was going to sacrifice one family, Ember, to save the rest, and he would have lived with that guilt for the rest of his life. The thing would have taken his choice, probably one of the children, probably Catherine, based on the attention it paid to her, and would have done to her what it did to William. Eleanor couldn't let that happen, so she made sure there was no family left to choose from. It's a horror story. There's no happy ending, no last-minute salvation, no clever trick that solves everything. Just a mother who loved her children enough to kill them, and a creature that got its payment in the end anyway, because the debt was satisfied through death, which is what it wanted all along. I survived because I had something the Hutchins family didn't. Eleanor's diary, her warning, her example. I knew what I was dealing with early enough to make a bargain before the debt grew too large. I was alone, with no family to protect or sacrifice, and I was willing to lose everything to end the cycle. The thing is still there, in the north woods of eastern Kentucky, on land that's now protected from human settlement, waiting, patient, eternal. Sometimes I wonder if I really escaped, or if I just postponed my own collectio. And the bargain said my debt was forgiven. But what if there's a clause I didn't understand? What if leaving the woods doesn't mean leaving the thing's reach? I've seen people watching me sometimes, just ordinary people, in crowds, going about their business, but they turn and look at me at odd moments, and their eyes are wrong, and I wonder if it's checking on me, making sure I'm keeping my end of the bargain, reminding me that it knows where I am. I sleep badly these days. Every sound outside my window makes me think of Catherine Hutchins standing in the yard, singing. Every shadow that moves. Wrong reminds me of the thing at the tree line, waving, but I'm alive. I honor the bargain I made, and every year that passes, I make sure the Conservation Trust is still active, the land still protected, the Northwoods still left alone. It's not much of a victory. It's not even really a victo. At all, just a managed defeat, a controlled retreat from territory humanity should never have claimed in the first place. But it's what I have. Eleanor Hutchins wrote her diary so someone would understand what happened to her family. Now you understand. They didn't vanish because they wanted to. They didn't disappear into some romantic mystery. They were killed by a mother who loved them too much to let them be taken by something worse than death. The Appalachian woods are beautiful, they're ancient and wild, and they hold secrets that predate human history. But they're not empty. They've never been empty, and some parts of them will never be ours, no matter how many deeds we file or fences we build. There are places where the old things still hold claim, where debts accrue whether you know it or not, where bargains must be kept one way or another. Stay out of the North Woods. Do. Nate, build your house on land that feels wrong. Don't ignore the warnings when they come. And if you ever find yourself facing something beyond human understanding, something that offers you a choice, remember Eleanor Hutchins. Remember that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is tea, but make sure the monster can't have them, even if that means taking them yourself. I think about her often. I think about her last moments, preparing the poison, watching her children play, knowing what she was about to do. The strength that took, the love that required. She was 26 years old. L.D. Catherine was 7. Mary was 4. Thomas was 32. The baby was never born, never got a chance to draw breath in a world that might have destroyed it. They've been gone 142 years now. But Eleanor's diary remains. Her warning remains. Her choice remains, preserved in ink and leather, hid, den and a wall until someone found it and learned what happened. I learned. Now you have too. Make of it what you will. Just remember, the woods are older than you. The mountains were here first, and some debts come due whether you agreed to them or not. The thing in the North Woods is still there, still waiting, still keeping its bargains with absolute precision. Stay away from the places that feel wrong. Trust your instincts when the land tells you it doesn't want you there. And if you ever inherit property in the Appalachian Mountains, especially property with a history of families disappearing, walk away. Whatever you paid for it, whatever you hope to gain, it's not worth the price that will be extracted. Eleanor Hutchins tried to tell us. She left her warning in the walls, preserved it for someone to find. I found it. I'm passing it on. Don't make her sacrifice meaningless. D. On B, the next family that vanishes into the woods. The debt is always waiting. The collector is always patient. And the bargain, once sealed, is absolutely binding. I kept mine. I destroyed the house, protected the land, ended the cycle of human habitation in that cursed place. I lost everything. Gee, I own to do it. But I'm alive to tell you this story. That has to count for something. Eleanor Hutchins didn't get that chance. She made her choice and lived with it for maybe an hour before the poison took effect. But she wrote it down first. She left her testimony. A family vanished in the Appalachian woods in 1878. Now you know why. They were caught between impossible choices, between a debt they didn't know they owed and a collector that never forgets. Eleanor chose the only mercy she could give. I hope you never have to understand why that was the right choice. I hope you never have to make a choice like that at all. But if you do, if you ever find yourself in a situation where the normal rules don't apply, where something beyond human comprehension is making demands you can't refuse, remember that you have more options than you think. You can run, you can bargain, you can fight, or you can remove yourself from the equation entirely. Eleanor chose the last option. It was brutal and final, and she paid the highest price imaginable. But the thing didn't get what it wanted. Not really. It wanted to take, to change, to make suffering last. Instead, it got bodies. Quick D. Eaths. Mercy killing. She won, in a way, the only way she could. I think about that sometimes when the shadows move wrong outside my window, when I hear voices that sound too familiar calling from places they shouldn't be, when I wonder if my bargain is really as binding as I hope it is. I think, Eleanor Hutchins was stronger than me, braver than me. She faced the impossible and made an impossible choice, and she did it to protect her children. I just ran away and burned down a house. But maybe that's enough. Maybe small victories count when the alternative is absolute defeat. The North woods are quiet now. The house is gone. The land is protected. The thing waits in the darkness between the trees, patient and eternal, for the next time humans forget the old rules. But it won't be my family that forgets. I don't have a family. I probably never will. The price of survival was everything I owned and everything I might have built. Was it worth it? Ask me again in another 40 years if I make it that long. If the thing keeps its bargain. If I keep mine. For now, all I can tell you is this. A family vanished in the Appalachian woods in 1878, and the diary from that year explains and why. They were paying a debt they didn't know they owed to something that had no mercy and infinite patience. Eleanor Hutchins made sure the debt was paid on her terms. I made sure no one else would have to pay it at all. And somewhere in the north woods of eastern Kentucky, something old and patient and wrong continues to wait, honoring bargains made long ago, collecting debts from those who forget the rules. Don't forget the rules. Don't build where you're not wanted. Don't ignore the warnings. And if you ever find yourself facing the impossible, remember you always have a choice, even if all the choices are terrible. Eleanor Hutchins chose. I chose. Now you know what happened in the Appalachian woods in 1878 and why it matters in 2020 and why it will matter for as long as humans think they can claim territory that was never theirs to take. The mountains remember. Theater. E-woods remember. The old things remember. Make sure you remember too.